if we don't change, if we don't stop getting fossil fuel, if the temperature continues to rise, there will be an apocalyptic future. There's billions of people living today in that apocalyptic world right now.
All right, everybody, welcome back to FreedomFest 2023 here in Memphis. I am joined today by Mark Moss, macroeconomist, host of the Mark Moss Show, author of the Uncommunist Manifesto, the Uncommunist Manifesto.
Right.
Great title. We're going to be going through a few different things today. We're going to go through macroeconomics. I want to get your view of where we are, where we're going.
Yeah.
I also want to get an insight into Bitcoin mining. I think it's such an important thing in the economy right now that few people are talking about. And then I want to get your opinions on energy and where we're going.
I love it.
Let's kick it off, Mark.
Yeah, let's do it.
Where are we at? Where are we going?
Shoot, man, where are we at? Where are we going? Well, in which regard? Looking at it from a macro viewpoint, right? I mean, we're basically at the end of what I think is a 100-year sovereign debt bubble, right?
Agreed.
And you look at, I like to study cycles. I like to go back and study history. And so you can see that there's cycles that repeat. And about on an 80-year cycle, you see like what I call a financial revolution cycle where the system has to reset. And that part goes in with kind of some of the fourth turning stuff, but more from an economic cycle. It's really about the debt cycles and the business cycles. Like Ray Dalio has done a really good job breaking those down. And so we're at a point where, debt just continues to accelerate, but the diminishing returns are starting to drag down the economy. So we've seen GDP growth, from 3%, and now we're down 1%, right? So we're in a point where we can't pay this off.
If we're at 1%, because our GDP right now, the sale of liquid natural gas, which is bought for $2 in America, sold for $28 in Europe,
right,
is pretty much the only reason we have a positive GDP.
Right. And that's a good point, right? I mean, if you look at the United States overall and what we export, so we export goods and services, but the services are financial services, social media services.
Correct.
Right? And so really at the end of the day, we're seeing the world shift from financial services more into commodities and real assets, right? And that's really exaggerating, has been exaggerated through the Russia-Ukraine situation, and we're starting to see that the world is shifting back to commodities because we have to understand that we don't want money.
Right.
We want the things money buys us. Goods and services.
Absolutely.
And so what we're starting to see, especially with the rise of the BRICS nations and so forth, they're like, we produce the goods, the commodities. The United States produces finances.
Right.
And so the problem...
And advice. We're good at advice.
Right? So we export the services, financial services, like I said, social media services, but the goods that we export is really all around energy.
Yep. Correct.
And to the point that you're making, I mean, that makes up a big percentage of the GDP. That's what we export for commodities, for physical products. But the regime that we have in place today is so against that.
Yeah.
And so if we continue to decrease the amount of energy that we produce and export and, in a move to renewables, things like that, that's going to really affect the GDP of the United States. But more importantly, it affects the position of the United States in the world. Mm-hmm. Because, as we're starting to see this battle over money starting to shape up, where now supposedly by the end of the summer, the BRICS will launch their gold-backed currency. But you have to understand back to what we already said, where you don't want money. So if I go to Chuck E. Cheese, I don't want their tokens. What I want to play a game. Right. But in order to play the game, I have to get the tokens. Well, the dollar is the most recognized and most usable currency in the world today. But what do people really need the dollar for? Everybody takes it.
Goods and services.
No, well, nobody's really buying goods and services from the U.S. for the most part, right? Our trade balances are off.
Internationally, store of wealth.
Store of wealth, right? But now with the rise of the yuan, for example, what would people want the yuan for? Well, because they can actually use it to get goods and services.
Right.
They're actually exporting things. So I think by us continuing to cripple our exports, that's going to diminish the dollar's role in the world, and we're already obviously starting to see that. So we're at a point where the debt cycle is kind of coming to a head. The Federal Reserve is trying to gain some sort of legitimacy by raising rates at the fastest rate in history, but they've now broken themselves, right? So now they're not producing any profits to send to the Treasury. So now the Treasury has gone broke, and now the banks are going broke. And so we're at a point...
Wait, no, I thought Janet Yellen told us that the banks are fine and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, every time they say it's fine and you're safe, it's the opposite
Run for the hills,
It's the opposite of that, right? Just like Bernanke told us there was going to be no problem with the banks or the housing crisis in 2007.
Yeah, Jim Cramer's long on the U.S. Treasury.
Right. And so what we've seen is that as they've continued to raise rates, what it's really done is it's put a kind of a crimp in asset prices, which has plunged tax revenues. So we're witnessing, tax revenues plunge while at the same time the expenses are continuing to go higher and higher. And so we're caught in this doom loop.
Agreed.
We're caught in this doom loop. And even the Treasury's own reports and reports also from the CBO office show that the report that Treasury put out said an unsustainable path. That's what they called it.
Yeah.
And they project debt to be over $50 trillion by the end of the decade. And so that's where things are going.
Yeah.
You know, I like to say that there's always been two constants in life. There's death and taxes, and now there's three: death, taxes, and money printing. Right?
100%.
So I think that's kind of the big macro picture on a more of a domestic macro picture. If we go to a little bit of a bigger global macro picture, I think we're still witnessing potentially probably the lowest inflation we'll see for the rest of the decade. As the world, what I call it is the decentralized revolution. So over the last 50 years, really 80 years, the world's moved towards centralization, so central planning. And of course, we see that through the rise of the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, Trade Organization, the UN, IMF, et cetera. But now we're witnessing that unraveling, or I should say the pendulum is swinging back towards decentralization. And so, from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And now, we're seeing probably at least three different regions. Obviously, we have the Asian region, China, et cetera. We have Russia. We have the global south, the BRICS, et cetera. And so as that continues to break apart and disrupt, we're going to continue to see supply chains breaking down. Just last week, China retaliated against our aggressive CHIPS Act and now has banned the export of germanium and gallium, which are two very important, vital components that we need to move into this EV world that we have. And so that will continue. We're going to see a lot more protectionism. We had, the last few decades have been kind of really just-in-time supply chains. An iPhone, for example, has parts from 6 continents. And how is all that coordinated? And as that continues to break apart, those just-in-time supply chains turn to just-in-case. Like, I better have this just in case.
Right.
And we're witnessing in Chile, they nationalized a lot of their lithium mines, for example. Mexico's been nationalizing some of their gold mines. We've seen, Russia said they're going to pump less oil out of the ground. Saudi Arabia wants to pump less oil out of the ground. They would rather keep the commodity in the ground than turn it into fiat currency that's losing value.
Right.
We're witnessing, even GM spent $650 million on a lithium mine. So people are now abandoning currency and one would rather hold hard assets. And so I think that's going to disrupt trade. China is stopping us from getting the assets that we need. And that will increase costs of goods to go up. And I think, the world that we know will be a little bit different,
Great.
So those are kind of the big headwinds that I see. Or
Well,
tailwinds, I should say.
I agree with everything you just said right now. And the scariest part of it all is that our government's doing nothing about it. So, released documents that were classified at one point, released to the world, show us that 32 nations are laundering Russian oil using the U.S. dollar through Saudi Arabia. So that relationship with
India.
And India. Yeah. So the relationship with Saudi Arabia is super important when understanding the BRICS conversation. If Saudi Arabia is going against our treaty, which was originally, hey, you're rich and powerful in the Middle East, everyone hates you, we'll protect you, just back our dollar with petrochemicals, right? And when we start to see them fading away from their alliance or their reliability as a partner, the government's done nothing to reverse this trend. So I believe, probably with you the same way, that BRICS will be an issue. The global currency reserve will be an issue, but I think the gold-backed currency of BRICS is a fallacy. India's already said we're not interested in using yuan, and if you have 5 nations that aren't really historically allies or friends, who's going to hold the gold? And that's going to be an issue. And I've heard that a couple times today, and I agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree. with that. I think a couple things. One is I'd say back, so you're referencing like the petrodollar agreement that we have with Saudi Arabia, which is important to understand because back to that Chuck E. Cheese analogy, because energy, oil specifically, was dominated in dollars, people needed dollars.
Right.
Back to the Chuck E. Cheese. But if they no longer need dollars to buy the oil, then what do they need the dollars for?
Exactly.
Right. So that's definitely a big piece of that. As far as the BRICS nations and the gold-backed currency, I would agree with you for a couple of reasons. One, no nation wants to live on a sound money standard.
Right. No government.
No government.
All people.
All the people. Most people don't really understand that, but yeah, no governments want that.
Right.
They don't want the austerity that brings.
Correct.
I think number two, we can't even get 50 states in the United States to agree on something. Now we have, Florida, South Carolina, Texas banning, CBDCs, for example. How do you get all these independent countries
to
agree?
Right.
So the chance of that is very unlikely in my opinion. So for those two reasons, one, they don't want to live on austerity. Two, how do they all agree?
Right.
And I think ultimately, as far as like who holds the gold, I think there's easy answers for that if we want to kind of like game plan that a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, settlement on a monthly basis or settlement quarterly, fly the gold over, so to speak, right?
But that raises questions for the gold standard. What if the plane goes down in the middle of the ocean and we can't recover the gold?
There's
right?
I'm not arguing for that.
I'm going to get to a point here. You're going to like it.
Yeah.
You're going to like it because it's going to go back to digital currency.
Sure. I mean, and we all know why gold won't work because who controls the gold, who controls the ledger, sort of a thing. But I think we could argue that maybe there's a way to make it work. But I think overall it's going to fail because of, like I said, austerity, and two, no one's going to agree on that. And ultimately, what we're witnessing is really. Who controls the money controls the world.
Yep.
Mayor Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's money. I care not who makes its laws. And so what we're really witnessing is, we want to have that control and power. Each nation does. They want to have their own fate in their own hands. And so why would they want to use Russia's currency or China's currency or Lebanon's currency or Brazil's? Like they don't.
Right. They want to use their own.
They want to use their own.
And that's where I think the digital revolution in monetary exchange, especially with international settlements, is going to be a big topic that most economists actually are looking over, except you. And when we look at the digital platform, do we need a global reserve currency if we have blockchain and we have tokenization? So if I want to buy a ton of gold from you, I can tokenize a ton of gold that's been assayed, prove it, like it's real, and then I can just simply upload rupees into a system, transport a token to you, you download it in US dollars, transaction is clean, simple, and really fast. And I think that's where BRICS is coming in. I think a lot of people are looking at BRICS as a currency competitor. I think they're creating a competitor to the SWIFT system. And if you can create a competitor to the SWIFT system that's more efficient, less costly, and faster, you're going to win global dominance pretty quickly.
Well, there's a different competitor for the SWIFT system that's being launched right now. The BIS has put out 2 papers on it recently, the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank above central banks. And so there's 2 different papers they put out recently. One is called Project M-Bridge. Okay, so most people would say or argue that the dollar is not going anywhere because the SWIFT network, because of the correspondent bank system that we have, because of the deep liquidity in the financial bond markets, et cetera. And so China can't do that, Russia can't do that, nobody can just do that. You can't just go rebuild that. But what I would say is that when you look at like the way the internet worked in the United States, because the United States had wired telephones, we were able to get the internet across those wired telephones. But when Africa went to the internet, they skipped wired and went straight to wireless.
Right.
And so while no country can compete with the current monetary system, SWIFT, correspondent banks, et cetera, what they can do is leapfrog past that and start a new system. So a central bank digital currency system.
Right.
And that's what the BIS has proposed with this Project M-Bridge, where basically each of the central banks will then have their own currency, central bank CBDC currency, and Project M-Bridge will be a hub at the BIS that will swap those currencies for each other. And so that bypasses the entire SWIFT network and just, here's a new system. And so that's certainly coming. And of course, it's China, Asia, so Hong Kong, China, Thailand, as well as the Middle East with the UAE that are the ones that are the pilot in this right now.
Right. Well, and if you aren't familiar with the BIS, which I know you are, but for anyone watching out there, the BIS has openly stated publicly that they want a CBDC globally because it bothers them that you can spend $100 of your money and they don't know where you spend it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, yeah.
And that type of tyranny needs to be recognized. So people like us who are out here talking about these things, I'm hoping people are listening and paying attention because this stuff's coming.
Yeah. The way that I see it, though, too, is back to this kind of decentralization. So when you study cycles, what you see is about every 250 years, there's a big, what I call a political revolution cycle. So 250 years ago was the American Revolution, the French Revolution. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. And so really it's this pendulum that swings from centralization to decentralization, but it's also driven by technology.
Yes.
So 250 years ago, approximately, we had the Industrial Revolution, and that technology was very centralizing. So people had to start moving to cities and factories. We had big companies. We had big mass manufacturing plants. And that mass manufacturing, with Henry Ford creating the assembly line, et cetera, created giant companies, and you had assembly lines. And you had to create a management style to manage the masses, sort of like a cog in the wheel. And then we had these political structures that were built to manage that. But now technology has changed, so now we have small internet companies, and now we have digital nomads living all over the world. And now we no longer can manage those people like cogs in a wheel because they're all independent. And so the political structure that we have today is not is obsolete. It's for an old system that's
Agreed.
gone. And I think the reason why that's important is so now technology is moving us away from centralization into decentralization. And so as the world continues to break into smaller and smaller regions, that will happen. And the reason why that's important is because I don't believe in the near future, in the next 100 years, we have another global reserve currency.
I agree.
So the days of the world agreeing that this right here, we're all agreeing
Right.
is it. This is what it's going to be like. That's over. That's over.
Agreed.
And so we're going to have each nation saying, nope, I'm using my currency. But we're also going to have people like me and you going, well, I'm just going to be on a Bitcoin reserve.
Yep.
And we have Michael Saylor saying, my company is going to be on a Bitcoin reserve. And we have El Salvador saying, we're going to be on a Bitcoin reserve. But some people will still be on a gold reserve, and some people will still be on a fiat dollar reserve. And so I think that's what happens. And I think the days of the one global reserve currency is done for now.
It's kind of a ridiculous thought to begin with. It's like everyone agreed that this company or this country or this person are in power globally. I mean, it's impossible to manage a global system. You talked about the sensitivity in supply chain. That was by design. When you get global,
Yeah.
if I want to make a brown Toyota Corolla, I need pigmentation from Bolivia.
Right.
And if there's an earthquake in Bolivia and I can't get that pigmentation, I can't sell a brown Toyota. That's a real. I actually got pulled into a company to go, can you figure out a technological system to be able to eliminate supply chain issues?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you can't do it because everything's disparate, right? This company has theirs, they have theirs, it all communicates. So people are trying to build this global infrastructure, which I believe is dead. I'm 100% with you that a global reserve currency and the dominance and power it provides to potentially your enemy is too risky in this world. So when we look at where we're going right now, what should people be doing? So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin because the decentralization power, the freedom that it provides, the ability for you to store it, to hold it, to manage it, it's a digital asset, but it's also a physical asset. You can actually walk around with it and do peer-to-peer transactions off of the grid, government not knowing, and you're big into the mining space. So how important is Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining in the new economy?
Well, a couple things. I think one, so we're talking about cycles. We have the political revolution cycles, we have the financial cycles. We also have on about a 50-year time frame a technological revolution cycle. So about every 50 years is a technological revolution, which is different than a new technology. Technological revolution is different in two ways. One, it changes the course of humanity, and two, it drives financial markets. So we've had five: the Industrial Revolution, steam engines and railways, electricity and steel, oil, automobiles, mass production, microchip, telecommunications. Mm-hmm. And that was 1971. And now 50 years later, which puts us right here, we're witnessing another one. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's Bitcoin and the decentralized technology that gives us. Mm-hmm. All right. So how do we think about that? Well, back to all financial markets are driven by that. So what's dominated financial markets the last 50 years? Telecom, internet. Mm-hmm. What dominated before that? Ford, GM, GE. Mm-hmm. What before that? Oil, steel. Right. So I think as we start to witness this new technological revolution starting to change the way that we communicate, work, organize, et cetera, it also drives financial markets. And so there's going to be all types, there's an entire ecosystem, right? And so, sure, Bitcoin mining is one of those. Mm-hmm. There's all types of, and then even just within Bitcoin mining, there's a million parts in that ecosystem as well. Yep. Subsets, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that be producing the chips that go in the computers or extruding the steel for the cases or providing the oil and gas for the energy of
picks
that.
And shovels.
Yeah, picks and shovels, right? And so I think there's going to be lots of opportunities if you want to think about it. Obviously, you can just buy Bitcoin, but I think there's all types of opportunities to participate in the ecosystem, just like there are in the telecom space and the internet space, et cetera.
I totally agree. So in the Bitcoin space by itself, we're oil and gas. We got to talk about energy.
Yeah,
what are you bullish on energy moving forward?
I'm super bullish on energy going forward. You know, I think anyone who's not doesn't really understand anything, right? And really, at the end of the day, life is energy, right? Everything is energy, and the law of energy is that energy isn't created; it's only transferred.
Yep.
Right. And so no one is creating energy. There's the myth of moving to this EV world or this renewable world is a myth. It's not renewable. Solar panels and windmills last about 20 years. How's that renewable?
And where do they go when they're done?
Right. I mean, they go to a landfill.
They poison the ground.
That's not renewable. And so in order to get that energy, we must use other energy to get there, right? And so I think anybody who thinks that we're going to get rid of fossil fuels doesn't really understand the world, how the
Right.
world works. Because another reason why is as we have added new forms of energy, which we have, the share of oil and gas or old shares of energy are still there. We've added new energy
We've
on
augmented.
top of it.
Yeah.
And that's because more and more of the world needs energy. One of my friends, Alex Epstein, wrote the book Fossil Future.
Great book.
Great book. And
Introduced me to Alex one time.
yeah,
Great book. Great
Yeah,
book.
it's a great book. And he talks about how, these environmentalists, these opponents of energy, say that if we don't change, if we don't stop getting fossil fuel, if the temperature continues to rise, there will be an apocalyptic future.
Right.
The whole world's going to, and he argues,
gloom.
and I agree because I've traveled the world, there's billions of people living today in that apocalyptic world right now.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes.
Where they don't have electricity to go to the hospital for their baby to have a sonogram. If their baby's born premature, there's no electricity to put them into an incubator. They're living that future right now today, and those people need energy. So the world needs more energy, not less.
Agreed.
And as we move into the technological world more, we're going to need more energy. And so the need for fossil fuels is not going away, and there's no replacement for petrochemicals.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Nuclear should be looked at very seriously. I'm an oil and gas guy, but right now there's nothing.
But I'm talking about nuclear doesn't give me what I need to make tennis shoes or
Okay.
tires
Well, for
or
medicine.
household cleaners
Right.
or medicines. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So certainly, eventually, we can start to use nuclear or other forms of energy, fusion in some far-off world or whatever. We could use that, but there is no replacements for petrochemicals.
None.
Not today,
None.
and maybe never. Right? And so I don't see those as going away. We'll continue to add new sources. And so anyway, I'm extremely bullish on it. I think oil took a pretty good hit in the last 2 years. I think it got a little overbought because of the scares of the Russia-Ukraine situation. We're going to cut them off of the world. That's going to be catastrophic. But the reality is they're selling just as much oil to the world that we ever had. So we never really had that problem. So it got overbought. It overcorrected. In addition, the Biden administration dumped the entire SPR reserves of the United States, which is...
Don't worry, they're buying 5 million barrels back. They've sold off 440, but they're buying 5 back.
Yeah, which is insane.
Insane.
And so I think those two factors really got gold, oil, to go from...
Sorry, they're all commodities.
To go from overbought to now being oversold.
Yes.
And I think now we're starting to see, hey, it got overreacted. I think oil's bottoming here. And over the long term, I'm extremely bullish on oil for two reasons. Well, one, I already talked about the demand side of the equation. So the world needs it. We have billions of people that need it. So the demand side is there. And unfortunately, these people making these policies are crimping the supply side of that.
Big time.
So as the demand continues to grow, which it will, I feel pretty certain of that, the supply side will probably start shrinking. And if it doesn't shrink, the regulatory costs and so forth will only push the prices up. And so I think I'm bullish on the price of energy moving forward.
I love it. And it's absolutely the demand side or the supply side of the business right now is extremely unclear. If you talk to an actual analyst that'll tell you the truth, they'll say all the supply in oil and gas right now is back of a napkin. When pipelines get shut down, you can't track and measure. You're going off the back of a napkin. Oh, I sold this many loads here, and that's what's available. But we're seeing the same things happen in oil and gas with reporting from our government that we're seeing in the jobs report, which obviously the last 14 jobs reports have been, the BLS beat their own numbers and Wall Street's numbers for estimates, which is a statistical anomaly to do. And at the same time, they've revised all of them 3 months later down 100,000 jobs. So we're not being told the truth on jobs, oil supply. We're in a really dangerous environment economically because you don't know what to trust, you don't know who to trust. And to be honest with you, you have to be looking at decentralization because those are central powers that are leading people down a very bad road. So talk to me a little bit about the Uncommunist Manifesto and give me a quick Cliff Notes I'm dating myself here, how old I am, but a Cliff Notes I think it's called something new now, but the Cliff Notes version of what this is, because I'm assuming it, I haven't read it yet, I will, I'm ordering it on Amazon, everyone should order it on Amazon, but I would love a Cliff Notes version so we can get people interested in downloading it.
Yeah, but thank you for that, and I do want to talk about that. I want to just say one thing real quick, going backwards. So, as this world continues to change, and as I already kind of made the case, and I believe that we probably agree that the world is moving back towards commodities and real assets as opposed to fake financial assets. When Russia had their bank account seized, I think the whole world realized, shoot, that's all fake. And so, I think if most people that are wondering what to do about all this information shift their mindset to think about. Instead of thinking about wealth being different, wealth is assets.
Yes.
Right? Wealth is assets. Rich is you make a lot of money, fiat money.
Right.
wealthy as I own assets. So I think, one, make that shift. And two, think about growing your assets as in growing your wealth. And I like to think about, rather than thinking about it as investing, I like to think about it as a savings. So I make my money with my businesses, and I get paid in fiat, but I want to save that. I can't save in fiat. It's losing money value so fast. And so where do I save it? Well, I save it in real estate. I save it in Bitcoin or gold. I save it in oil fields because that will continue to increase my purchasing power for me. So I think if people just make those couple little mental shifts in their minds, they're going to be much more equipped to deal with this transition as we move forward. That being said, back to the book.
Well, before you do that, I cannot believe that we haven't met before, because for the last 2 years I've been telling everyone in the world, on camera, off camera, gold, silver, Bitcoin, oil and gas, raw land. Those are your best investments over the coming 5 years. And a lot of people
and it's the best place to save your money.
I love that you're talking about saving and not investing, because you're actually taking fiat, converting it to a tangible asset. That asset's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down. But over time, that's how a savings account, that's how an investment account works.
That's right.
But at the end of the day, you have something of substance. You know, we live in a world of illusion. We have fake money. We have fake paper, right? Seed & Co. owns every stock in the world. You actually don't own a stock. You rent a stock from them, and you get to profit from it in the middle. You actually don't own your home either, right?
I think when people think about investing, then they start to think about the return that I'm going to get, and then it starts to put them into like a short-term mindset, like a high-time preference. How much can I make in this short period of time? And they're not willing to look over a long period of time. That's why I think saving makes a difference. Because for me, my goal is for my wealth, my assets to always go up, and go up till the day I die, and hopefully with my next generation, et cetera, they continue to go up. And so thinking about it long term, I think, is the way to do it.
Let's dive in the book.
Yeah, so about the book. So, in March of 2020, or not March of 2020, but in 2020, when the BLM riots were happening and all that was going on, the head of the BLM, the two ladies came out and said that we're trained Marxists. And, I have studied politics. I've studied extensively history of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and the Marxist revolution, Mao's, the Mao's Cultural Revolution in China, et cetera. I've read a lot about Karl Marx. I've read a lot about communism, but I had never actually read his book.
Right.
And so I say all the time, like, I like to go to the source. And so I had never done that. So they said that we're trained Marxists. I'm like, I need to go read directly. So I went back and I read the Communist Manifesto. And I was shocked. And I was like, have people ever read this? Have the women hear what they say about women?
It's like the devil's Bible.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't. He says to summarize communism in one statement is the abolition of private property. Do people know that? Like, they understand what that is, right? So all these people that want to vote for socialism, do you understand that means you don't own anything?
But you'll be happy.
Yeah, you'll be happy. So anyway, I read that and I was like, man, if people understood this. And so I was on a trip down in El Salvador, on a Bitcoin trip down there, and with my co-author, and I said, man, we should just rewrite this. And so we did. So the Communist Manifesto is like a book, sort of like this. And I think some of the best books in the world are just booklets.
I agree.
Frederick Bastiat's The Law, Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. I mean, just put together one clear, concise thing and put together. This is not an overwhelming book. You can read this about an hour, hour and a half if you're slow. So we took the same concept. So the Communist Manifesto had 4 chapters. We wrote 4 chapters. And we wrote about the same stuff. So we didn't go tit for tat. We proposed a better way. Now, we referenced the book back a little bit, of course, and we kept the same format. A couple things that I think we did really well. We have a couple charts in here. I really love this chart. It shows like this political spectrum. And we said all politics are on one side of the equation. All of politics is centralization or central planning. I don't care if it's red or blue or left or right or communism or fascism. It's all political ideology. And that capitalism is natural and organic and emergent. So we have some concepts, we have some charts and stuff like that. And at the end, we have sort of a challenge, just like he did. He said, workers of the world unite. We have a world to claim. And we said, sovereign individuals of the world, stand up and claim your autonomy. And so it's an educational book. It's a book that should hopefully provide hope and challenge people to think differently and to become the best versions of themselves. And I think that's really the big divide, is that really Marx and Marxism and Marxists, they hate people. It's evident. If you read his book, you understand
100%,
that.
yes.
And they don't want to change themselves. They want you to change.
Yep.
But that's not how the world works. We need to become the best versions of ourselves. And we need to take care of ourselves first, our family, and then those around us, and that's what changes the world. And so this is a book of hope. It's a book to change your mind. It's a challenge for you to become a better person and create a better world.
Well, me personally, so I'm going to give you a book to read about communism and infiltration in the United States called Hope of the Wicked. It's almost impossible.
I haven't read that.
Almost impossible to find a version. It was written in 2000, never republished, never put on digital copies. You have to buy a paperback. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get your info. I'm going to buy 10 copies of this. I'm going to read it myself. And this sounds like the best gift ever to give somebody who doesn't know a thing right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hand those out in the office. I'll hand them out in parties. But I'm going to get you Hope of the Wicked as well and send it to you because I'd love to exchange that and keep the conversation going. Because
the original Communist Manifesto book, unfortunately, is one of, if not the most read books on political science and economics.
Along with Rules for Radicals. Yep.
And so this is also a book on political science and economics. And again, in a very simple, easy to read manner. So anyway, it's our hope that it continues to get out there.
Well, we will do our best for it, man. This has been a great conversation. I look forward to our next one because I'd love to have a little more time. I know you're busy signing books. And if you haven't checked out his show, you absolutely need to check out his show. Get the book, The Uncommunist Manifesto.
That's right.
Been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure hanging out with you. Thank you. Thank you for watching this interview. All of us here at King Operating really appreciate the time that we had with you at Freedom Fest. If you're interested in seeing more interviews just like this, click the link below and have a look. Thank you so much.